Welcome to Good Burger Reviews. My name is John, and I'm here to do a brand new special presentation for the end of the year wrap up. And we're going to get into the top 10 most disappointing movies of 2025. Now, you guys have already seen, and I've released my top 10 movies of the year, and I've released my top 10 streamers of the year. I still have my worst to compile, and I feel like I have a few more stinkers that I want to try and squeeze in before I rate those out. And then I also have my most surprising as well. So keep a lookout for those videos coming in the future. Now, my disclaimer when it comes to most disappointing movies. This is not a list of the worst movies of 2025. This is a list of movies that could be bad, could be good, but mostly have disappointment in them. Either the whole movie's a disappointment or something big is disappointing me in the movie. And a lot of that has to do with my expectation going in, my anticipation. So a lot of movies that I may have highly anticipated, especially ones that are part of giant franchises that have been successful in the past, they just automatically go up in anticipation because they've proven me well before, but disappoint now. You'll see maybe some turkey burgers in here because there was something in the movie that was just extremely disappointing. So I do also have some honorable mentions in this category. The 5 movies, I'm just going to briefly go through those 5 and then we're going to get into the 10. So the honorable mentions are The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, and simply because it just did not compare well to the original movie back in 1992, and it also was a disappointment in compared to a movie a lot of people were comparing it to this year, and that is The Housemaid. Number 2 for honorable mentions is a movie Together. Now, Together was on the list because when I first watched it, it was a disappointment. And I was highly disappointed in the way it ended, in the way they did this whole body horror, and it just threw me off course. But I do want to say the big reason why I took it off the list is because I watched Together a second time once it hit streaming, and I actually liked it better a lot more the second time. And maybe knowing what I was getting myself into watching the second time and really understanding that Together was actually a really scary movie. I mean, it scared me. There's some pretty intense moments. And I just thought, I don't want this on my disappointing list. I mean, I'm still disappointed in the ending, but I didn't want it in my top 10. So it just gets an honorable mention here. All right, the next 2, I'm just going to mention them together. Gator Lake. It was a streamer. It was about a gator in Florida. It simply was disappointing because it did not have enough gator. And I'm going to also mention Jack Black's Anaconda here as well, which I really liked Anaconda as a movie. And you may see it pop up on one of my other lists. But I want to put it in an honorable mention here because I was just disappointed in the lack of snake in the movie. And then last for the honorable mentions is Him. And I was disappointed, I mean, one, because it was kept being associated with Jordan Peele, but it turns out he wasn't the director of that one. But the real reason I was disappointed in Him was as a football horror movie and a football thriller, they really had an opportunity to do something different and scary and intense. And I felt like the direction that this movie went in was just disappointing. I felt like it was a football movie that was trying to be artsy, and when you blend in all the cult themes, it basically was the movie Opus in disguise. So here, when we get to the top 10 of disappointing movies, it mostly is in order as the ones that are the least disappointing are at the bottom, and the bigger disappointments are at the top. But I have to, at the end of the day, say that they're not in an exact, very specific order like my other 2 top 10 lists were. So with no further ado, let's get into this. Coming in at number 10, released to Netflix in May of 2025, Fear Street Prom Queen. This movie was directed by Matt Palmer. It stars India Fowler, Susan Sun, and Fina Straza. When the it girls competing for prom cream at Shadyside High School start to disappear, a gutsy outsider discovers she's in for one hell of a prom night. So what disappoints me about Fear Street Prom Night? Well, overall it is a very disappointing, basic performance from all the actors. Here was a movie that, compared to movies like Prom Night, which is pretty much, it's the same storyline here, it just falls short of being scary or intense. It also became very predictable, and one thing I really didn't like about it was the amount of killers, which led me to put up a short complaining about the amount of killers in slashers lately. And this movie had 3 killers. And I also feel like it's disappointing compared to the Fear Street trilogy that was released in 2021. I feel like at least 1978 and 1994 were much better additions compared to 1671, which I would have said is a disappointment, and this one being a disappointment as well. Coming in at number 9 for disappointing movies, released in November of 2025, Keeper! This movie was directed by Osgood Perkins. It stars Tatiana Maslany, Rossif Sutherland, and Biker Turton. A romantic anniversary trip scheduled in a cabin turns sinister when the dark presence reveals itself, forcing a couple to confront the property's haunting past. What disappoints me about Keeper? Despite the fact that Tatiana Maslany's performance and acting is really good in this movie, Osgood Perkins' story is too complicated and too misleading, and his style of directing just seems to lose my interest. I feel like in this one the ending is weird and the scares seem to lose their meaning when I can't keep up with the plot. There seems to be a lot of imagery and visual effects that were just put in there just for the hell of it, and the story itself left me needing explained. And I felt like I had to look up stuff online before I even did my review. As of lately, it seems like Osgood Perkins movies get overhyped and there's lots of anticipation for them, and when they don't pull through as expected, they leave me disappointed. Coming in at number 8, released in May of 2025, Bring Her Back! This movie was directed by Danny Philippou and Michael Philippou. It stars Billy Barrett, Sally Hawkins, and Mishka Haywood. The basic premise: a brother and sister uncover a terrifying ritual at the secluded home of their new foster mother. Similar to Keeper, I was impressed with the acting by all the main stars, especially the kids and Sally Hawkins in this one. This is another one where the story gets a little bit complicated and drowns out the scares and the good performances. I felt like this movie had gore and disturbing scenes just to be disturbing. And another thing that contributes to the disappointment in this one was I saw this the same weekend as streaming. This on streaming was The Surrender, another Bring Her Back type of story, and I felt like I was more impressed by that story, a simple streamer, than this big theatrical release. And at the end of the day, for me, Bring Her Back just went too off course and seemed unrealistic in some of the plot points, especially referring to the foster home experience. However, I will say I was impressed with the Philippou brothers when they did Bring Her Back, and this is disappointing as compared to that. But I am still intrigued and looking forward to whatever projects they might do next. Coming in at number 7, released to Netflix December of 2025, The Great Flood. This movie was directed by Bong Woo Kim. It stars Kim Da-mi, Park Hae-seo, and Kwon In-sung. The basic story: a disastrous great flood sweeps the planet on what may be the last day on Earth. A desperate flight ensues to save a child from a flooding apartment building. So what disappoints me about The Great Flood simply was I thought I was going to be watching a very exciting end-of-the-world disaster flick which it started off that way, but it started to lean too much into an AI component, complicating it with another component where we were in a repeating day movie like Groundhog Day and Until Dawn. And not blending all those things quite well, it got too complicated in this plotline. Also considering the fact that with an end-of-the-world disaster flick, I was hoping to have better technical and visual effects, and the effects in this one were just obviously green screen and CGI, and it wasn't done top-notch due to the budget. And another thing about this movie was the auto-dubbing. Now, compared to movies like Brick and Zeom, which made my top 10 streamers of the year, this one didn't do as well in that department either. It contributed to the acting seeming very basic and the movie not being as intriguing or as fun to watch. Coming in at number 6, released in February of 2025, The Monkey. This movie is directed by Osgood Perkins. It stars Theo James, Tatiana Maslany, and Rowan Campbell. The basic plot: when twin brothers Bill and Hal find out their father's old monkey toy in the attic, a series of gruesome deaths start. The siblings decide to throw away and move on with their lives, growing apart over the years. But the monkey returns to them in their adulthood, causing the same havoc again. So what disappoints me in The Monkey simply is, as a Stephen King adaptation, it really lacked in scares and seemed to rely more on a Final Destination style death sequences and jump scares as compared to just scary horror in stories. And this was another one where I really couldn't get with the characters. I was not a fan of the twin brothers when they're kids or when they're adults. And Tatiana Maslany is impressive in this one, but her performance again wasn't enough to save the disappointment I felt in this movie. And I think what it comes down to for me is maybe me and Osgood Perkins are not a good match when it comes to director and audience member, because I just don't ever seem to get with the movies I've watched of his, as Longlegs was the #1 disappointment movie from last year, and Keeper was already on this list, and now here we are again with The Monkey. However, I do recognize he's a very talented director, and will look forward to stuff he brings in the future, hoping that maybe something will grab my attention and leave me less disappointed. Coming in at number 5, released to Shudder in November of 2025, Abraham's Boy: A Dracula Story. This movie is directed by Natasha Kamani. It stars Titus Welliver and Brandy Hepner. Basic premise: Abraham Van Helsing moves his 2 sons to the United States in an attempt to escape their past, which was connected to Dracula. So as a spin-off to Dracula's novel by Bram Stoker, this movie came in quite disappointing, mainly because when you have a movie that's attached to Dracula, I feel like it should really be focused in on vampires, vampire lore, and vampire action. And this movie suffered from all of that. When I'm watching it, I felt like I was watching more of a drama or an episode of Little House on the Prairie based on the setting, and was disappointed by the fact that there wasn't much vampire action at all, and never even a bite. Coming in at number 4, released in March of 2025, Woman in the Yard. This movie is directed by James Colette Sierra. It's released by Blumhouse. It stars Danielle Detweiler, Akwai Akapolaskowski, and Peyton Jackson. The basic premise: Ramona is a single mother who is still grieving the loss of her husband after a fatal car accident that also left her disabled. She now has to care for her 2 children, Taylor and Annie. However, when a mysterious woman clad in black whale dress appears in her front yard, she must do everything she can to protect her family. This is another one where I was extremely impressed with the acting from the main characters, the girl and the kids, and it also had great mystery, intrigue, and horror in the front end. But what disappointed me about Women in the Yard is simply the ending. The ending was too divisive, too vague. I felt like I wasn't even sure what happened in the ending. It had themes such as suicide. It was very divisive online. And at the end of the day, I just wasn't a fan of this movie at the end. Coming in at number 3, released in August of 2025, Hell House LLC Lineage. This movie was directed by Stephen Cognetti. It stars Elizabeth Familia, Sierra Salka, Mike Sutton. The basic premise: after a near-death experience, Vanessa Shepard faces a nightmare in Abaddon. As mysterious deaths occur around her, she discovers her connection to the Abaddon Hotel, Carmichael Manor, and decades of unexplained murders. What disappoints me the most about Hell House LLC Lineage is it's coming off of a movie that brought me into this franchise, Hell House LLC The Carmichael Manor, which I was extremely impressed with and really liked. This one was a complete letdown compared to that one. And I think one of the biggest causes is it felt like, is this franchise running out of steam? It seemed like with this one, the main gimmick, which is the clown standing in the background, the clown being very still and then moving at the last second, it just seemed like their big gimmick was being overused, and the more and more they did it, the less and less scarier it was becoming. Combine that with a very boring storyline, rough acting on the main star, I just felt like this one was getting lost in the shuffle. Speaking of being lost, it seemed like this plot was so complicated that you really need to watch the entire franchise again before going into this. This is not a movie where you can just start off in the middle of the franchise. Where with Carmichael Manor, you were able to do that a little bit. This installment comes back feeling stale. Coming in at number 2, released in July of 2025, I Know What You Did Last Summer. This movie is directed by Jennifer Caitlin Robinson. It stars Jennifer Love Hewitt and Freddie Prinze Jr. and Madeline Klein. A group of friends are terrorized by a mysterious killer who knows about a gruesome incident that happened from their past. Well, what disappointed me most about I Know What You Did Last Summer is the same thing as the last one. It's coming in the middle of a franchise that's been very successful before. I'm a huge fan of the original I Know What You Did Last Summer and highly anticipated this one. Now, this is another one that I watched again recently, and upon second watch, I realized that I was disappointed with it even more than the first time I watched it in the theater. This legacy reboot, requel, whatever you might want to call it, seemed to be based in too much nostalgia and trying to do too much of what a lot of these legacy sequels are doing, and just bringing back the same old story without really bringing anything new to the table. At the end of the day, this one was the same old story, but worse. But something that bothered me in my second watching was realizing that there was some inconsistencies with the killer, who we know is Freddie Prinze Jr., so spoilers on this one. It seemed like there was dialogue between him and Stevie in the movie that was simply just put there to deceive us as audience members and not to deceive, I kind of get it when it's put there to deceive the characters in a movie, the other characters who are trying to solve the mystery and they want to trick them. But when they're the only two in the room, they don't have to go on with their gimmick because they're by themselves. So it didn't make sense there. Plus, at the end of the day, I just hated that Freddie Prinze Jr. ended up being the killer. Why? At the end of the day, you could have came up with anybody. Like, Freddie and Jennifer Love Hewitt needed to be... And like, it seemed to me also like they were doing this whole Gale and Dewey thing where they're on again, off again. They were off again in this movie for sure. It seemed like they were permanently off again. But it just seemed like the characters who were the heroes in the original 2 movies needed to stay the heroes. And I feel like this killer and the slicker with the hook is not as strong as Ghostface, so his kills were decent enough, but his character is not enough to hold up the whole movie. Coming in at number 1 for most disappointing movies of 2025, released in September of 2025, The Conjuring Last Rites. This movie was directed by Michael Chaves. It's starring Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga, and Mia Tomlinson. Paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren take one of the last terrifying cases involving mysteries of the Smurl haunting, and they must confront demons once again that are hiding in a mirror. So what disappoints me about Conjuring Last Rites, and that is, I felt like the big disappointment in this one was it leaned too much into the Ed and Lorraine story and not enough into the Smurls, which were the people who actually were living in the house that was haunted in this one. And their storyline, I felt like, was sidelined. So, I mean, I feel like in the first 3 Conjurings, the Warrens are in the movie, but they are not always, like, the main focus. I feel like they share the main focus with the family that's experiencing the haunting. And in this one, it's just not the case. Along with the fact that it was compacted with adding Judy and Tony as their kids, son-in-law and daughter. And there was also major plot devices. The characters in this movie did terrible things. They made terrible decisions. And when it came to the scares, I felt like it was generic. They brought back Annabelle just for the sake of having, Annabelle will bring attention, but why Annabelle? Why not have another ghost? And then, speaking of their ghosts, one of the ghosts reminded me of the Smiling Demon. So it just seemed like this edition lacked originality. And even the other ghosts reminded me of Gladys from Weapons. And for a movie that was advertised as the most scariest and was going to halt their careers and all that, it didn't have that many scares. The Mirror Conduit was not as strong a conduit as some of the past conduits. And I felt like also this movie had a slow, hokey ending with the whole Tony and Judy's wedding, hosting the entire Conjuring crew, including James Wan, at the wedding. I guess I can leave it with this, with The Conjuring Last Rites being one of the most highly anticipated movies of the year. And the amount of disappointment I experienced while watching it led it to be number 1. At the end of the day, this franchise might want to just take a small break before coming back again. Well, that's it. That's all the disappointing movies from 2025. Just remember, this list is subjective. It's my opinion. I'd love to hear movies that you thought were disappointing in 2025, as we just came off watching a big disappointment for this year, Return to Silent Hill. So please put in the comments disappointing movies from 2025 or any big disappointing movies that maybe I should avoid. Please like, subscribe, tap that notification bell for future horror content with Johnny Goodburger reviews. And don't forget to stay scared of all those disappointing movies that set us up for failure.